With threats to our nation waiting around every corner, adaptability is more important than ever. When conditions change without notice, quick strategic thinking is crucial. And with obstacles consistently impending, determination is essential in overcoming them. It's this willingness, decisiveness, and resilience that sets Marines apart. With our fighting spirit, we don't just fight battles, we win them. Marines are the constant our nation counts on to fight the unknown. And through adaptable problem solving, we do just that. Learn more at marines.com.
This episode is brought to you by Hyperice, the leader in advanced warm-up and recovery technology. They have tons of innovative products, like Venom-heated wearables to help soothe sore back muscles, Normatec compression boots to speed up recovery and increase circulation, and Hypervolt massage guns to improve mobility. Loved by athletes like Naomi Osaka and Erling Haaland. Try them yourself. Get 10% off your order with the code MOVE at hyperice.com.
It's only a kick, a jump, a block. It's only a serve. It's only a tackle, a run. It's only for the fans. After all, it's only pressure. You got this. Adidas.
It is the holiday season, and traditionally that is the time for a Christmas special. And in days gone by, on television in this country at least, that would mean an extended version of your favourite show set in the sunshine. Think Victor Meldrew's One Foot in the Algarve, and Del and Rodney in Only Fools and Horses, Miami Twice. But I'm Michael.
And I'm John. So what is the Anything But Footy Christmas special? Well, it's called Keep the Anything But Footy Flame Alive. And as we link up with our colleagues stateside and their Olympic and Paralympic podcast, which is called Keep the Flame Alive, it's essentially what we do here in the UK, but with a US twist. Welcome to Jill Jaracz and Alison Brown.
Hello. Hello.
Well, it is brilliant to link up stateside with you both, and it's fantastic that we are doing this joint production for Christmas this year. And I guess, first of all, we sort of discovered each other online, didn't we? I mean, you're doing exactly what we're doing in the US. What was the reasoning, the thinking behind it?
Well, this right around Rio, I'm a freelancer in my day job, and I didn't have anybody to really talk about the Rio Olympics with, and I really missed the water cooler discussion. And Allison and I did not live far away from each other at the time, and she was driving through town, and we had dinner, and I said, "Hey, do you want to start a podcast?" And she said yes.
Having no clue what, I mean, certainly I listened to podcasts. I just said yes. Jill and I used to work together, and we had a great time, and we enjoyed working together. And I wasn't working at the time. My daughter was very young. So I said, sure, I've got time. Why not? It seems like a good idea, because when we used to work together was during Salt Lake City, and there was a lot of turning around because we worked in sort of a pool environment saying, did you see this last night? Did you? So the idea was we would just keep that going in a way that neither one of us had at the time.
So that's where the love comes from.
Well, the love for both of us was childhood. Jill was 84. My first one that I remember is 76. 80, the winter, most clearly, because I was living in downstate New York at the time. So to have the Olympics in Lake Placid, New York, in my state was so mind-boggling to think of this world event happening. Of course, it was like 5 or 6 hours away because New York is huge, but it still felt very close.
So, Jill, 84, Los Angeles.
Yes.
Is that your? Because
Yes.
I think that's ours as well, isn't it, John? Because I always say actually my first memory's Sarajevo, 84, Torval and Dean, I think, and that was kind of the story I told on our very first podcast. So was it definitely Los Angeles for you, Jill?
That's the one that really clicks in my mind and hooked me on the games. I knew of 76. My best friend loved Dorothy Hamill and had a Dorothy Hamill doll and had the Dorothy Hamill haircut, as many young girls in the United States had after 1976. But I was a swimmer at the time. That was one of my big hobbies or big activities as a kid. And that I just remember being glued to the swimming and Nancy Hogshead and Carrie Steincypher tying for the gold in, I believe it was the 100-meter free. That just clinched it for me. That blew my mind that could happen. And how about both of you?
Well, mine was LA, and it would have been the athletics that I remember. Now, it was the 4x1 relay, because I can then remember going out and playing on the street and running around a bend. So I'd never run around a bend before. I mean, this is like an incredible thing. But of course, 84 was probably, from a British point of view, more Seb Coe, Steve Ovett, the 1500 meter Steve Cram coming through, and the whole rows around Ovett and Coe and the like. But that passed me by. I was 8-9 years old at the time. But that is my main memory, and of course the jetpack, the opening ceremony.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'm a big fan of opening ceremonies, by the way. I definitely remember Torvill and Dean 84, because we had a lodger at home in the winter of 83, 84. So my sister and I were sharing a bedroom, and I can remember we were given permission to have what was a black and white television in the bedroom to watch Torvill and Dean and Bolero. And I don't think I'd ever watched figure skating or a Winter Olympics before that. So that got me hooked. And then obviously, because at that point the Summer Winter Games were in the same year, it was quite a quick turnaround then into Los Angeles. And I recall watching Los Angeles, getting up in the morning, because obviously with the time difference, and we would have had BBC Olympic breakfast would have been what it was called. And I can remember getting up every morning and bringing my quilt downstairs and sitting on the sofa and just watching the LA Olympics happen. And the one name that always comes to my mind is a guy called Malcolm Cooper, who's a shooter, no longer with us, who won a gold medal in Los Angeles. And this just blew my mind that there was shooting in the Olympics. There was synchronized swimming. John knows this. Artistic swimming, as it now is. I've been a fan ever since LA 84. All these bizarre sports, and it just opened up this world. It was an absolute dream to then actually sort of get involved and start seeing some of this stuff for real, I think.
And Alison, you mentioned about Montreal. Is that why?
Yes.
Is that why sometimes you talk about Canada quite a lot in your podcast? You like to mention the Canadians.
No, I just like Canadians. No, Montreal, I'm not Canadian, but honestly, and this is going to sound so stereotypical, every Canadian we have ever met has just been lovely to me. So I was 76. I was, a little kid gymnast who, would go out in the yard and do cartwheels. So it was Nadia Comaneci who was my hero. So why do I mention Canada? I don't know. They're just so lovely. And I would say the same thing about New Zealand. Every Kiwi we've met has been absolutely lovely. So I do have an affinity for your former colonies.
Literally nothing to do with us. Can we just point that out?
No.
Nothing
Not
to do
personal
with us.
colonies.
No, exactly.
Well, New Zealand, we spoke now many years ago to Michael Warren, who's a sports historian, and just New Zealand is so amazing. And the phrase that he used was always punching above their weight. The sports success of that country makes absolutely no sense. They have this tiny little population, and yet percentage-wise, the silver ferns are everywhere. So I'm always so amazed by them.
So, Jill, we leapt in about when you started the podcast. So it's Rio. So that's how long it's been going for.
We got it off the ground in September 2017. So
Okay.
Purposely did it in the run up to Pyeongchang.
Yeah. No, you're fine. I always get asked this question. Who's the most famous person you've interviewed?
Well, famous relative. We got starstruck when we talked with Laura Wilkinson, diver. We've gotten starstruck when we've talked with Kim Rohde, who has been in 6 Olympics now, 5, 6. Those kind of people are starstruck to us, but they aren't big names. I as a kid swimmer, talking with John Neighbor was a huge deal because when I was a kid, I watched black and white films of him doing strokes so we can analyze how to do strokes better. So who have we talked to that's famous?
I'm thinking of who starstruck me was Charlie White, the
right.
ice dancing gold medalist, because I'm a big figure skating fan. Ben Ryan, the rugby coach, who now became famous because that book is becoming a movie. So that name will be coming in. The joke with me is I either adopt the athletes or I have a crush on the athlete. So I'm either going to like bring them into my home as my new child. And this has nothing to do with age, because like I wanted to adopt Deanna Price, the hammer thrower, because I was just like, I love her. And yet she's like 15 years younger than me. No, more than 15, but clearly not young enough to be my child. So it's the ones that get us excited are not necessarily the ones that everybody would recognize, or they're very famous in a niche.
Have you ever wanted to adopt as a child one of our podcast guests, John?
Not probably top of my list. I might make them a cup of tea. I might make them a cup of tea at some point, but no. I agree with you that when you do interviews with people, you get some real gems from people. And what I love about the what we do is we speak to so many different people and quite a lot behind the scenes. We kind of run a spin-off series called Great British Bosses, who we interview team performances, directors, CEOs. And you get so much insight from those people into the world of sport that however many times, and I don't mean this disrespectfully to any athlete that I've interviewed, but you never get that from an athlete because they're so focused on what they're doing that sometimes you don't really get a story from them or gems from them. But I do find that I really enjoy speaking to people who work behind the scenes. And my total boy fan podcast would be Seb Coe. Literally every time I speak to Seb Coe, I just melt. He could literally just talk Chelsea Football Club to me on a podcast called Anything But Footy, and I would still be happy. I just let him do it because he's just Seb Coe.
Okay, so I have a question about Seb Coe. Does he make you call him Lord Coe, or is he just Seb?
Seb.
That's what I've heard.
You always say, I mean, we did a podcast with Seb Coe relatively recently for the 10th anniversary of London 2012 it was for the London Legacy Development Corporation and a podcast they do called My London Legacy. And he was in Monaco, I think, in his office at World Athletics. And he popped up on the screen, the Zoom screen, and we were like, oh, Lord Coe, it's lovely to see you. And he basically just sort of wry smiled and went, I think we know each other well enough by now that Seb will do. And he's like that. He was I was at the Commonwealth Games covering that for radio this summer. I know probably not an event that your listeners stateside will be overly familiar with, the Commonwealth Games.
Oh, Canada. Don't even start with that. We had whole discussions about the Commonwealth Games. A lot of our listeners and on the Facebook group, it was hot. It was hot.
So he came and I was at the stadium and we were just sat in the press seats, and he just came and spent a couple of hours just, chatting to the various writers and journalists and people that he knew. And he just came and sat down and just, wanted to chat about the athletics. I think first and foremost, he's just a track fan, and he just wanted to talk to like-minded people about what was happening on the track, I think. So no, he never insists on Lord Coe. But I would suggest that he's probably the reason we do Anything But Footy. And for people in the United States listening, they're probably thinking, why are we called Anything But Footy? Our footy, of course, we are talking about soccer. And when we started in our podcast in 2019, we looked and just thought it's saturated with, English Premier League, soccer podcasts.
Or NFL.
Or NFL. And just soccer just dominates the landscape in this country so much. And we were like, there has to be an outlet for all these other guys, Olympians and Paralympians, that has to be an outlet that champions those guys. So that's why we kind of tongue-in-cheek started it as Anything But Footy. But the name has stuck and the athletes love it. And when we're at events and we've got these Anything But Footy blue microphones, they all want their pictures with it, don't they? And we're talking like gold medalists here. We were at an event for celebrating 25 years of national lottery funding, which is what funds, obviously, the elite sports system in the UK. And we had all these like multiple gold medalists there, and they just wanted their picture with that microphone. It was bizarre. It was really good. And then it was obviously a bit weird because Team GB put a soccer team, a football team, a women's team into the Olympics. So I had to go to the team announcement and have the press team go, "This is Michael from Anything But Footy. Now speak to this football player."
Have you had those moments where people have fanned over you and you're just so confused by it?
I can safely say no.
No, I don't think so. I think the athletes like the brand. They like the platform. And to go right back to the beginning, obviously you guys said you worked together. John and I used to be rivals, rival radio stations, rival networks. But we have been doing this quite a long time, sort of in the run up to 2012. So, to go all, TV reality show, these athletes, a lot of them have been on that journey with us a little bit, I think. And I think we do get that sense now with some of the big names that they do know us. They have seen us at lots of things. Someone like Tom Daley, for example, has seen me at the British Diving Championships, where two men and his dog go. And that then helps when you're on that Olympic stage, when you're winning a gold medal.
It does make you proud when people, famous people are listening. We do have some amazing athletes who listen to our podcast, and that does make you feel quite proud that you do know that they listen and they are Olympic champions, and they're sitting there at home with their medals around their neck listening to our podcast. No, they don't do that, but
full kit.
That's exactly how we picture them too.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. The big question, Jill, I really want to know, and Alison, is from a worldwide perspective, because we've spent the last 10 years, and we've made a podcast series this year, looking back 10 years of London 2012. What do people around the world think of London 2012?
You see, that's hard because London 2012 is very special to me because that was really the first one I shared with my daughter. She was, like 9. No, yes, she would have been 9 at the time. So that's the first one that we sat down and watched together. And she was a big fan of Missy Franklin because Missy Franklin was only, I think, 17 and wonderful. And she had really big feet. And Missy talked about her big feet. And Sarah was at that age where your feet grow first. And like so many kids do, they admire somebody who has succeeded because of the fault that they see. So Sarah felt bad about her really big feet. And here's Missy Franklin saying, "My big feet make me a better swimmer." So London is very special to me. I think London actually is seen as quite successful, especially the Paralympics of London. I know that was a big turning point in the UK. I think that was a big turning point worldwide for the Summer Paralympics because it got a lot of coverage here. I think that was the first time many, many Americans even saw Paralympic competition.
And for Summer Olympics, I mean, you're coming off of Beijing, which was very foreign in a way. I mean, it was a coming out for Beijing as a city and China as a nation, kind of in the global spectrum. You're off of, and before that was Athens, which was nice to have the games back in its ancestral homeland, but not a very good games economically. And we all knew that. But London was just like, especially for people that we know and some of our listeners who have gone, it's just like the games are back on a English speaking soil, and London, we can figure it out. We're going. And that's kind of what I feel like happened with a lot of people. They liked London just because it felt familiar in a way. And then London, and as I have done research on London here and there over the years, just the amount of effort they put into making these games fabulous. It was packed. People were excited. Volunteers were everywhere. They did some really innovative things. there's always going to be a fight over whether or not the revitalization efforts are successful. But I think from what we understand, that these games transformed an area of the city that really needed some help.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the phrase that is used is that an entire new neighbourhood was created at Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park, and it's quite apt, I think, this year that it was called Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park, to be honest. And the venues are there. They're still in use, and the aquatic centre, you can go down there on a Tuesday morning, and they've got inflatables in there, and it's like your local swimming pool. And John and I have been in there and interviewed families that use it as their local facility because they live in East London. The Copper Box, which is where the handball was in 2012, is a multi-use venue now. You've got a netball team, the London Pulse netball team. You've got a basketball team that operate out of there. We've just had Rugby League World Cup matches there as well. The main stadium is the home of West Ham United Football Club in the English Premier League and is used for concerts. It's got Major League Baseball coming there. Obviously, still there's that athletics legacy around that stadium as well. The Velodrome is very much in use and obviously was the Commonwealth Games venue as well. But as well as that, all that other infrastructure has created this environment where you've got universities moving in, you've got museums coming there. So Victoria and Albert Museum building a second sort of base now in East London. And it's completely transformed. East London was not a place you would ordinarily choose to have gone to from 2000 and before 2005, and that bid was won. The famous thing that John and I talk about is the pile of rotting fridges. That's the Sebco story, isn't it, John?
Yeah, it is an amazing place, and I think what I'm really interested in is that Paris don't seem to be doing it the same way. So Paris is obviously coming up next year, effectively year after next. What about LA? Are they looking at a park, or is it going to be more heritage buildings that are already there?
Yeah, so what we know so far about LA is the existing venues. They're really pushing to very much use as much existing infrastructure. The LA Coliseum being the cornerstone of for the game, so that we're not spending millions and literally billions of dollars on building white elephants.
Yeah, I would agree with that. That's really the push to show that you can have a cost-effective games. And I feel like throughout history, LA has been the city that shows the world how to do it, whether or not the rest of the world appreciates that or likes how Americans do it. LA saved the movement. I mean, maybe that's going a stretch too far, but LA was very instrumental to the movement in 1984 because nobody wanted to bid anymore. So they had a games that was very successful and raised money. Now we're going to have a games where they're really not going to spend a whole lot of money on infrastructure. And I think, again, it's going to be profitable in a way. And they're already working on legacy efforts in terms of investing money into youth sports in the area now. So LA 84 has a legacy organization called LA 84, and some of that is preserving some history, and they have a lot of documentation that's helpful for research, but they also have a youth sports element to it and really have invested a lot of money into youth sports in the area.
It's interesting, isn't it? I think in the future of hosting games now, with that cost in mind and the size of the games, that London's done it 3 times, Paris will be a 3rd time host, then LA will be a 3rd time host. We're going to get a more limited pool of cities that can step up. Certainly with the summer games. I mean, I don't know about you, but we've got huge question marks over what the future is for the winter games and how they're hosted. But obviously people are talking about going back to Salt Lake City, because to build a winter sports park to host the Olympics now just seems to be, you might as well just go and burn a load of dollar bills and pound notes, millions of them, billions of them in the street.
I know when we were in Beijing and we went up to the mountains and just saw these resorts plopped down in the middle of nowhere, and it would be miles and miles and miles from anything. It was very disconcerting. And the fake snow and the everything just felt so dropped from outer space and so not integrated in the surrounding areas. And of course, Lake Placid was much, much smaller, but we visited Lake Placid almost at the start of the podcast, 5 years ago, and how that entire town was the Winter Games and how it's all still used. And then you've got climate change built into that. So yeah, the Winter Games is always not quite the ugly stepsister, but it definitely is the smaller of the two events, and fewer countries could host and are interested. And what does that mean going forward?
Of course, I should mention when London bid for 2012, didn't it beat New York? Wasn't New York one of the bidding cities?
It was.
Sorry.
It's okay.
Have you forgiven us?
I have forgiven you because honestly, I had participated in a couple of the New York 2012 events, to getting excitement. And New Yorkers were exactly as you wanted to be. So they would come up to us as volunteers and say things like, well, where am I going to park with all these people here? And how do you expect all these foreigners to come here? I'm like, I am so glad New York didn't get it. And I adore my closest big city. But man, we could not have done it as well as London. No doubt.
And I just want to ask a question, obviously, and I know it's obviously pre your podcast, but Atlanta in 96, the Centennial Games, in this country is viewed appallingly. Now, I know...
Yeah, that's because we were rubbish.
Yeah, it was, and...
It was our worst ever Olympics, ultimately.
It was one gold medal for Great Britain. And it changed sport in this country because after that, they went, we can never be this bad on an Olympic stage again. And that's when all the funding and everything else came in. But I'm just interested, and this touches on our experiences in Rio as well. Is the problem just a little bit the narrative that is fed to the public? Is if a journalist's coach doesn't turn up at the right time of a morning and he's 20 minutes late for the rowing, or the sandwiches are not quite up to standard in the media centre, that clouds the view. And I felt that in Rio a lot. I felt with the spectrum of wealth in Rio, from abject poverty to very wealthy people, I felt a little bit ashamed to think I'm moaning about a free bus service or the fact that there's not much coffee on today. And I think that's, in this country, I think that's one of the reasons why people view Atlanta so poorly, because some of those logistical things didn't work. I mean, do you look back on it in the US with pride?
Yes. In a short answer, I would say yes.
And I would say Atlanta is complicated because there were a lot of elements of those games that were spectacular, especially for the US. I mean, Michael Johnson.
Yeah.
Unbelievable performances.
I loved watching those games.
Yeah, we have the Magnificent Seven for gymnastics. That's a huge story. Although on U.S. television, you also had the embarrassment of the commentators were awful for gymnastics then, and that's a good juxtaposition of how it was. But you also had a games that was very commercialized, and yes, they had problems with transportation and getting people places, and that gets to be an issue. I do think media tends to blow some things out of proportion sometimes because they get a story and they have to run with it, and they have a deadline and they need to get eyeballs or headlines or clicks or whatever you need now to get people to pay attention to them so that their livelihood can keep going. I do think those games were good for the city. It was such a small city at the time, but we've done on our show, we have a little history segment, and every year we devote it to a different Olympics. And last year in 2021, it was Atlanta because that was the 25th anniversary. And there was a lot of change that was good for the city. When you're talking about things having the Olympics is an event that has a deadline, so cities get stuff done. And, you were talking about revitalizing the East End. There was a lot of revitalization in Atlanta that happened in terms of like sidewalks being built and trees being planted. And I was in Atlanta in November 2022 just for a day, and I went to the Atlanta History Center, and my Lyft driver and I were talking a little bit, and he said, yeah, when it was 25 years ago, all these trees that you see now had just been built. So now the city is a lot leafier and a lot greener because of the Olympics. At the same time, they also tore down some projects, and that's where I was staying, in this area that had been torn, where public housing had been torn down. How the displacement of those people and how that changed their lives, and whether it was a positive change or a negative change, I'm not really sure. But that part of the city is also safe to walk around in and things like that. And there's life there and activity there in a different way than probably was in pre-1996.
And of course, we can't forget the bombing. That changed how people view events like the Olympics. And the events of Munich 72 had become forgotten and so far in the distance and not part of so many people's lifetimes. And then the 96 bombing happened, and it brought it all back and said, this is a dangerous world. And of course, then things happened subsequently that really brought that home. But to have that happen in such a joyous moment did definitely change how people viewed security in public sporting arenas. And then there's Izzy. There are so many people who adore Izzy and so many people who hate Izzy. And I think Mandeville and Wenlock from 2012 probably had that same effect. There were kids who just thought those creepy little one-eyed guy was fantastic. But I will say this about Izzy, and I know Wenlock and Mandeville will have the same effect. There are kids who are now adults who are listeners of our show who say Izzy is the reason they got into the Olympics. And I think when we get like 10 years on, you'll hit those kids who will say Wenlock and Mandeville were the reason they watched and got into it.
Yeah, we were pretty dismissive of the Frisians the other week, unfortunately. I thought they looked like the Smurfs to me. But anyway, I'm sure I'll love them in Paris in a couple of years' time. Just a thought on the whole after-sell of the Olympics. Is this something that actually the Olympics could look at? Because we all know, you guys have been to Beijing and we've been to Rio, and as soon as the Olympics is done, they're out of there. They're not looking back. They're on to their next city, their next host city. Actually, shouldn't more stories be told? And it is part of journalists as well to go back and as you guys did, and look back, 25 years on or whatever. But actually, I've never known that, Jill, what you told me about Atlanta. And that has never come across in this. And actually, as Michael said, Team GB had the worst ever Olympics in Atlanta. And you could go back and tell that story from a British point of view, and how actually beneficial it was for Atlanta to stage those games. And I wonder whether actually the Olympics needs to do, they all talk about sustainability and green games and all that, but actually there does need to be some kind of legacy for every Olympics to ensure that it does change the narrative before the because we all know the reason why people don't want to host it is because it costs too much money and you get lumbered with white elephants. Well, actually, is that really the case? And are there benefits and trying to sell more of those stories?
That legacy report that came out this year from the IOC about all the venues, we did an episode going through all of those. Yeah. And that was really important, I think, because it's exactly what you're talking about, John, that idea of let's look back and see what influence just these buildings had. Now let's do a legacy report on what we were talking about earlier. What's the effect on youth sports? What's the effect on infrastructure in the city? What other influences have come to play? I think Tokyo is actually doing a really good job in this because they had that 1 year after event. Remember, we just hosted the Olympics last year. Look at all these cool things we're still doing. I thought that was brilliant.
Right. But I do agree that the IOC moves on, the organizing committees shut down, and they're really the ones that drive some of this. And sometimes I think for some cities, the legacy elements of their bid is a lot of lip service, and they don't really think about it, and because it takes time and effort and money to build a solid plan and to make sure that plan gets implemented afterwards. And Montreal is a surprising city of how they've made stuff work, because we all know Montreal had a horrific debt from running those games. And I went up there in 2016. No, I went up there in 2016 when it was an anniversary year, and they had a whole bunch of museum exhibits around those games. And I was officiating roller derby in one of the former venues, and that was cool because it was still getting used as a community center. But then we had them on the show, I think in 2019. I was up in Montreal again, and they are working so hard to make that stadium something that is used. And there's a lot of events that go on there. They have movie shoots in there as well. They can use it as sets for different things. The pool is just like the pool in London. It's a community pool. It's fabulous. They have athletic centers. They're really trying to make something happen because they know that it's a really expensive endeavor. And I do think cities try, and we just don't get to see a lot about that. What I noticed in about the 5 minutes I watched of the figure skating Grand Prix this weekend, it was in the Torino venue for the figure skating. That was great.
I was going to say, see, Canadians, fabulous.
Where would you love the Olympics to go? If you could plonk an Olympics in a city, a region, where would you like it to be?
Stockholm.
Oh, there.
I have been pounding the Stockholm drum since they lost the bid to Milan. That bid was so good, so well thought out, so controlled. Not a lot of room for messing about, for lack of a better phrase, but it just was such a fantastic bid. And we are having so much trouble finding proper host cities for the Winter Olympics. And how more appropriate could it be than being in Stockholm? And then with that sliding track over in Latvia and making it an international bid, just looked so brilliant to me. And I was very disappointed. And I get more disappointed the closer we get to Milan and the more problems come up. And now we're having all this trouble with 2030. The Canadian bid has fallen apart. Nobody really wants to put it again in the United States. Sapporo's having trouble. And I'm just begging Stockholm to, ask us out again and see if they'd be willing to give us another chance.
Go on then, Jill. A summer venue. Where would you like a summer venue? We've had a dream winter venue.
Right. I know. This is hard because there's part of me that wants, you hear India wants it, Jakarta wants it, and you kind of wonder, can those cities really make it happen? And there's part of me that's hopeful. I mean, I appreciated Rio 2016 in one element. I think there were a lot of factors against the execution of Rio, namely, governments that like bribes and things like that, and lack of budgeting and what have you. And that's going against where I lived in Chicago at the time, and we famously lost to Rio, and Chicago would have been a fabulous host city. I would still love to see the games in Chicago. I don't think they do it now, but I think they would be a great city. But I do wonder about the legacy of spreading the Olympics out. I wonder we're now getting close to 10 years past the World Cup in South Africa. Would South Africa be able to host an Olympics?
Well, of course.
I don't know. It would be nice to see.
Of course, Durban.
They should have been hosting the Commonwealth Games this year.
Yeah, and they pulled out, which is why Birmingham stood up for it. So I agree. I think South Africa would be an amazing place for the Olympics. I'm definitely not thinking Qatar. It's like avoid that at all costs. Don't know why you want to go do that. But I've written down Stockholm, Atlanta, Montreal, holiday destinations for the Cushing family. We need to go and visit these places. You've literally sold these places for me.
I thought you meant you and me. I thought we were going on holiday. Taking your wife and child on holiday. How disappointing. Why we're looking to the future? I mean, what's your views on the sport program? Are there sports that you would cut, winter or summer? Are there sports that you'd like? Do we want to get NFL in there?
No.
Anything but footy.
No.
Anything
Right?
but footy.
Well, I thought it was very interesting because you both spoke to Sky Brown, the
Skateboarder.
why did the word skateboarder? Thank you. I was about to say figure skater, and I'm like, no, that's the wrong skate. The skateboarder, and we were both troubled in Tokyo with how young all those skateboarders were, and was the sport ready? If your top athletes are 16 and under, is the sport really ready to be on the Olympic stage? I mean, she is a very sweet kid, and I loved that interview because you were very gentle with her. She's 13.
Yeah.
I mean, talk about adopting a child. I mean, she really is, in almost grandchild territory for me at this point. I mean, she's so young. And so that's a sport I question, just because was it ready for this kind of stage?
Interesting on Sky, because John mentioned earlier we do the spin-off Great British Bosses. So when skateboarding got that nod, if you like, we went and interviewed the chief executive of Skateboard GB, a guy called James Hope Gill, who lives not too far from me. And it literally, Skateboard GB was him in his bedroom. That was it. It's now, because of that medal, an organisation that employs about 18 people, as I understand it. So because the medal triggers the funding, and so that's why it's been able to. So I go down, I see James, it's pre-pandemic, so we're doing it in person. And I say, why is Sky Brown representing Great Britain? Why not the US? Why not Japan? And if I could just put something back to you, Alison, on what you said there, on that idea of being so young and welfare, what James Hope Gill said to me was that what Great Britain said to Sky Brown was, just carry on doing what you're doing. Carry on going and doing your competitions that you want to do your appearances that you want to do. We're not going to put you on a program. And what the States were saying, what Japan was saying was, you come here, you're on a program, we're going to start weighing you every day, which you don't want to be doing with a 13-year-old girl as a father of girls that are 12 and 10. You don't want to start that kind of activity, behaviors with them, do you? So what Great Britain said was, we will support you to get you to the qualification, and we will help fund that, and we'll give you the vest. But beyond that, we just want you and your parents to carry on doing what you're doing. And the States and Japan were like, no, you need to come and be part of the program. We need to see you. We need to have you here. We need to be doing debriefs and all the rest of it. So I do take your point totally, but I think the approach that they took with Sky in this country was as good as it probably could be. And I think, as I understand it, it was the parents' choice.
Oh, I absolutely am thrilled that she was Team GB, because on Team USA, she would have been plastered on cereal boxes. She would have been forced into commercials. She would have been a poster child. And I'm impressed with how protected she was by the British team. It was smart. I mean, she's a child. She's still a child. And the fact that we don't hear from her much except at competition time would not have happened in the United States, because we saw it with Chloe Kim. We interviewed Chloe Kim, way back before Pyeongchang, and she was being trotted out at 16 years old for every media event. And she struggled from it. I mean, we've seen a lot of these kids struggle when they get trotted out, and Team USA does not do a great job of protecting them.
Because I think actually one of the standout moments of Tokyo, one of the most important Olympic moments, was probably what Simone Biles did. And I know that there's always this debate that we will get fed very British viewpoint, very British coverage. As I understand it, you will as well get, we very much focused your TV coverage on what American athletes are doing. It takes a Simone Biles or a Usain Bolt, I think, in this country to sort of get beyond what the Brits are doing. And I think the Simone Biles story in Tokyo was probably one of the most important Olympic stories.
How was that covered in the UK?
I think it was a learning experience for a lot of journalists and broadcasters. I think, and I know certainly I was working for a radio station, and there were conflicting viewpoints in the radio station. Some people were of the opinion you shouldn't, put yourself up for the team and then let your team down. That wasn't my opinion, but that was certainly an opinion that was written about and broadcast. But I think certainly in this country, the discussions around mental health and the pressures of being an elite athlete, those discussions have ramped up significantly. And for someone like Simone Biles on that platform in that moment to say and do what she did, I think was a game changer.
I think in the US, I'd be interested to hear how it is in the UK. We put so much pressure on children to be professionals at almost every level. There's so many children in travel team sports, and a lot of it is with the hopes of getting college scholarships because college is so expensive. And that doesn't happen. Most kids are not going to be pros. And the amount of money and time that parents will invest into maybe one child of several, this one child that theirs has talent and everybody else kind of gets dragged along with it. And I do feel like kids get put under a whole lot of pressure that's not necessary, except for the reward of winning something and like the internal satisfaction that brings doesn't quite equate the amount of sacrifice it takes to get there. And the payout at the end, where you really feel like we have to get a payoff to make it worth all the money that we've put into this sport, is not quite there either.
I think it was one of the things that I really struggled with the whole Valieva case in Beijing was her age, and a bit like what Alison was saying, and Sky Brown. You can sit there and go, well, why is it wrong? Because I had to do lots of interviews. I think Michael and I probably spoke about figure skating more in that week than we've ever spoken in our entire lives since Torvill and Dean in 1984. But I was doing interviews with radio stations with just presenters who were just interested in the story. It crossed over. It was one of those stories, and it was like, well, why are the Russians pushing for her to compete? Obviously, aside from the whole doping allegations, but the fact is, we can't sit there and go, yes, it's outrageous that she's being pushed and pushed and pushed. And then we're saying, well, it's okay for our 12-year-olds to go and do Olympic sports as well. And I believe that there is a time coming up, and it's probably coming up pretty soon, where I think there has to be an age limit across all sports for the Olympics. And because the world has changed. It's not Nadia Comaneci time anymore. The world has moved on. These kids have a voice, and rightly so. And they don't necessarily want to do what they're being asked to do. A lot of them do, but some of them don't. And I think you can see that from what's going on with Canadian sport at the moment, certainly in gymnastics and the like. So, look, I think there's massive question marks about ages in the Olympics, and there should be, I think, some kind of age limit.
So then what do you think of the Youth Olympics? That
they should be bigger. Yeah, I think they should have more coverage. I think we should have the opportunity because you're then competing against your same age. You're all there together. It's the equivalent of going on a Cub Scout or a weekend, effectively. I'm not being flippant. It can be that way. It can be. This is about taking part. This is about bringing the world together. Cool. We've heard Thomas Bach talk about how the Olympics wants to bring unity together for the last 3 or 4 weeks as he's pushing his Russian athlete agenda through, very much so. But if you get the Youth Olympics and it's a jamboree, and it's a party in effect, then, but it is from 14 to 18-year-olds. And then that allows the Olympics to be a different thing. Now, you can also, and I can imagine some of the newspaper headlines in our country, a few papers leap to mind. If you're good enough, you're old enough. And if you're 16 and you're setting the world alight, you should go and represent your country. Not necessarily the right thing to do, I don't think, in the way that the modern world is.
Yeah, we've had Sky, obviously, I think, they did it the right way. They go back to 2008, Tom Daley, 14-15. He has just grown up and matured and just become a phenomenal young man. And I mean more than just diving here. I mean, just in everything that he does and the platform that he has, the role he had in the opening ceremony of the Commonwealth Games in Birmingham this year as well. And he went to the Games very young, but it doesn't seem to have had that destructive effect on him. So I agree with John. I think an age limit's coming, but I think more needs to be done on the systems that are producing these athletes, because it can be done right. And you talk about the togetherness. I think, what was really interesting when skateboarding was how together all those skateboarders were at the end. Whether they'd won medals, lost medals, fallen over, done really well, achieved an outstanding personal best, there was that brilliant togetherness at the end. And I thought that the new sports in Tokyo really energized the program.
Well, we talk about legacies in Olympic cities and host cities. I wonder if we should look at not necessarily legacies, but how the games have treated athletes 10, 20 years down the road. And especially for young athletes, was their involvement in sport good for them? How was it detrimental in some ways? Or how did it affect their body? Because I know, at least for us in the U.S., we famously think of Tara Lipinski, who won the gold at Nagano for figure skating at age 15. And by age 19, 20, she already was having hip replacements. And you don't have that.
I think it's a really important, again, having that profile. You only hear of the people generally who go on and be successful. So the youngsters who go on and achieve things. But we also know that there will be so many that will have, not even got to that level and had their lives potentially ruined because of it as well. I think it's a really interesting way of looking at legacy and looking at the benefits. And it's one of the things in this country that UK Sport, who control the money that gets passed around from the government and the lottery to the federations that run sport, it's one of the things they're really looking at is helping also successful athletes retire. Because what do you do at the age
transition?
What do you do at the age of 34, where all you've done is rode for your entire life, and or run or leapt into a sand pit, whatever? And how do you then have the rest of your life? Because there were more and more people taking part in sport and the Olympics, and but you want them to feel like, because we laugh, they say, we do interviews with them, say, you're retiring, and they're like, well, I'm not dying. They've got the rest of their lives to lead, but we say they're retiring from sport at the age of 24. Lots of swimmers do it. So it's something that they're really working on in this country, is helping them have another part of their career, rather than, well, when we stop, it's the end.
I think you've hit something really important, Jill. A more athlete-focused approach to it. I think, we can talk all we like about arenas and parks and all the rest of it, but until you just said that out loud, I hadn't really thought about legacy in that way. And I think you should be sticking that in an email to Thomas back at IOC.org or whatever, because I think it is. It's just how athletes transition out of elite sport at whatever level, whether they've won 17 gold medals or whether they finished 23 out of 24 or whatever it is. There has to be more done around welfare. I'm conscious of time, and we've been rattling on. So we'll aim to sort of bring it to a conclusion then by looking ahead a little bit. Who are our stateside athletes that we should be, and our Canadians, Alison, that we should be looking out for then next year in Paris?
Well, we have our own country in our show called Shukflistan, made up of our guests. So we don't just talk to American athletes. We have our Shukflistanis. So I will say two that are American that we had chatted with that'll be back are Maggie Shea and Stephanie Roble, who are sailors, both coming back from injuries and various health issues and looking really, really great right now. I do not have any Canadians that I can talk about, nor New Zealanders, but that's what we'll be working on over the next year, I think, to get some more people for Paris 2024.
John, who's you one to watch from a Team GB point of view? I've got a name written down if you...
I think we're going through a huge transition. We talked about this a minute ago, and I think there's a lot of our big name athletes who will be there, a la Max Whitlock in gymnastics and probably Tom Daley in diving, but they're all kind of, again, ending their careers. They're kind of coming to the end of their careers. And they're obviously the obvious ones. Laura Kenny, I think, has said this week that Paris is her last Olympics and she won't be coming back on the cycling. But I've stuck with cycling and I highlighted him at Tokyo, and I think he's going to become probably the best cyclist in the world, and that's Tom Pidcock.
Which is the name I have written on my piece of paper there, as if we were in some kind of David Copperfield, Darren Brown, mind-bending show. We've done this too long. I knew the name that you were coming up with, and I'd written it down a while back.
Yeah, he can do road cycling. He's the mountain bike Olympic champion. He's going to come back and defend that in Paris. He does cycling cross. He's a world champion at that. So he is incredible. These are the people why we started our podcast. We should just talk about these people because nobody else talks about them until they have become these mega superstars in Team GB land.
So should we do this again over a coffee and a croissant on the Champs-Elysees in person?
Absolutely. Definitely.
Well, thank you both for being part of our Christmas special, our podcast that we have named Keep the Anything But Footy Flame Alive podcast for Christmas 2022. We always love to hear your opinions. Our website is anythingbutfooty.com. We're looking to see a big spike in visitors from the US on that website soon. You can tweet us at anythingbutf. You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, or drop us an email at anythingbutfooty@gmail.com. This is Keep the Anything But Footy Flame Alive, a transatlantic crossover edition of your favourite Olympic and Paralympic podcast. Anything But Footy in the UK and Keep the Flame Alive in the US.
We had a lot of fun.
And likewise, thank you so much for coming on.
Social Podcast Network.
With the Lucky Land Slots, you can get lucky just about anywhere.
This is your captain speaking. We've got clear runway and the weather's fine, but we're just going to circle up here a while and get lucky. No, nothing like that. It's just these cash prizes add up quick. So I suggest you sit back, keep your tray table upright, and start getting lucky.
Play for free at LuckyLandSlots.com. Are you feeling lucky? No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18+ terms and conditions apply. See website for details.